The war had ended, but peace had not yet begun. August 1945. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly, quiet and indifferent. On a gray military transport ship, a group of Japanese women sat pressed against the cold metal walls. They were nurses, typists, and young volunteers now prisoners of war. The air smelled of salt, rust, and fear. None of them spoke much. They had been told what awaited them, that American soldiers were beasts in human form, that they would be humiliated, tortured, or worse. Every shudder of the ship felt like a countdown to their fate. Keiko, a 6-year-old nurse from Nagasaki, stared at her trembling hands. Just weeks ago, she had believed she would die for her emperor. Now she was alive but captured. The ocean outside felt like a boundary between her past and something she didn't understand. Sometimes, the women whispered among themselves, "Do you think they'll separate us? Will they shave our heads? Maybe they'll make us clean their floors." No one had answers, only the faint hum of the ship's engines and the slow beating of frightened hearts. Through a small porthole, Keiko saw the horizon turning pale with morning light. The ocean glittered cruelly beautiful. Somewhere out there was America, the land she had been taught to hate and fear. An American guard occasionally passed by, expressionless but calm. He wasn't shouting or threatening them. He just stood near the door, watching. That, too, was confusing. If he was the monster from the propaganda posters, why did his face look ordinary? The women tried not to think about it. They prayed silently, clutching small charms from home. A folded family photo, a silk ribbon, a piece of fabric from a lost kimono. Everything they knew had burned away in the war, and now all that remained was uncertainty. At night, they couldn't sleep. The ship rocked gently, the sea whispering against its hull. Keiko thought of the patients she had lost, the city that no longer existed, and the faces of those she'd never see again. Her world had been reduced to a metal box, drifting toward an unknown land. Once, she heard laughter above deck deep, warm voices, American voices. For a moment, she felt a sharp anger. How could they laugh when everything she loved was gone? But beneath that anger, something strange stirred curiosity. What kind of man could laugh after all this destruction? As the ship neared the American coastline, a low fog rolled across the sea. The women gathered near the small windows, silent, holding their breath. Somewhere ahead lay their captors. Keiko closed her eyes, whispering to herself, "If I must face the enemy, let me face him with open eyes." The ship's horn echoed across the bay, deep and final. The journey into the heart of the enemy had begun. Morning broke over the harbor like a secret slowly revealed. The gray mist parted, and the ship finally came to rest beside a long wooden pier. For the first time, the Japanese women saw America. Keiko pressed her hand against the cold metal railing and stared. Rows of tall buildings stood in the distance, their windows catching the sunlight like shards of gold. Trucks moved along the docks. The air smelled of coffee, oil, and seaweed, so different from the burnt, hollow scent of post-war Japan. Then, they saw them. American soldiers, tall, straight-backed, laughing. Their uniforms were clean, their faces open and calm. They weren't shouting or snarling. They were talking, joking, helping one another unload supplies. The women froze, eyes wide with disbelief. This wasn't what they had been told. Propaganda had painted these men as savage, cruel, and barbaric. But these soldiers looked human. Some even looked handsome, with tanned skin, strong shoulders, and confident eyes. One of them, noticing the women watching, gave an awkward smile and a small nod before turning away. The gesture was simple, yet it felt like an earthquake. A few of the younger women gasped softly. "Did he just smile at us?" whispered one. "Maybe it's a trick," another answered, though her voice trembled. As the women were led off the ship, the dock's wooden planks creaked beneath their bare feet. American guards stood on both sides, rifles slung, but not pointed. One soldier stepped forward, offering a canteen of water to a trembling nurse. She hesitated, expecting mockery, but the man just waited, patient and calm, until she finally reached out and took it. The water was cold and clean. Tears filled her eyes. She bowed slightly, the old reflex of gratitude, and the soldier, uncertain, lifted his cap in return. That small, wordless exchange spread among the women like fire. Their fear didn't vanish, but it began to shift from terror into confusion, from confusion into something they couldn't yet name. Keiko felt her heart pounding as they walked toward the waiting trucks. She had imagined this land as a place of demons and punishment. Instead, she saw people, men who looked proud, healthy, and oddly kind. Some were as young as her brothers once were. As the trucks drove them away from the harbor, she kept looking out the back, watching the soldiers fade into the mist. Their laughter echoed faintly behind her, mixing with the gulls and the hum of engines. It wasn't the sound of cruelty. It was the sound of life continuing, of a world that had moved on while hers had burned. Keiko felt something shift inside her, fragile but undeniable. Maybe, she thought, the enemy was not what she had been taught to see. And as the truck rumbled toward the distant camp, she whispered to herself, "Tall, smiling, and kind. They don't look like monsters at all." The war had ended. But for these women, the battle to understand the truth had only just begun. The trucks rattled along a dusty American road, past green fields and wooden barns glowing under the morning sun. To the Japanese women, the world outside the truck seemed impossibly alive, full of color and movement. It was hard to believe this was the country that had dropped fire from the sky. Hours later, the convoy stopped at a large camp surrounded by high fences and watchtowers. The sign outside read, "Allied Internment Facility." The women stepped out one by one, expecting rough orders, shouted commands, maybe even blows. Instead, they were met by quiet efficiency. American soldiers guided them toward registration tables. Female nurses Americans waited there, holding clipboards and small smiles. The Japanese women avoided eye contact, but the nurse's tone was gentle, almost soft. "Please, this way." "Sit down, miss. Would you like some water?" It was too strange. This was supposed to be a prison. Why did it feel more like a hospital? Inside the barracks, each woman was given a blanket, a bar of soap, and a clean towel. The smell of laundry soap filled the air, simple, comforting. Keiko ran her fingers over the rough fabric and almost laughed from disbelief. For months, she had tended the wounded with nothing but rags and cold water. Now the enemy was offering her warmth. That evening, the women were served food, real food, bread, stew, and coffee. The steam rose in the cool air, rich and unfamiliar. At first, no one dared to eat. Then one of the younger girls, trembling, took a bite. Her eyes widened. "It's good," she whispered. Soon, spoons began to clink against bowls. A quiet murmur of surprise filled the room. Some of them even smiled for the first time since capture. Keiko tasted the bread soft, slightly sweet, and felt tears prick her eyes. Outside the barracks, laughter drifted from a baseball field. American soldiers were playing, their movements easy and joyful under the golden light. The sound of the bat striking the ball echoed through the fence, a rhythm of normal life. Keiko stood near the window, watching. She had never seen men play like that, not soldiers, not since before the war. Their laughter wasn't cruel. It was pure, careless, and human. Something inside her cracked open. A thought came to her quietly, like a whisper she didn't want to hear. Maybe kindness can be more powerful than war. But with that realization came shame. She thought of her destroyed city, her fallen comrades, her family. How could she feel gratitude toward those who had caused such pain? The contradiction tore at her hate and awe, sorrow and curiosity, all fighting inside one tired heart. That night, She lay awake on the thin mattress, staring at the wooden ceiling. Outside, crickets sang in the tall grass. For the first time in years, she wasn't cold. And yet, sleep wouldn't come. The world was no longer divided between good and evil, and that frightened her more than any battlefield ever had. Weeks passed, and the routine of the camp settled like dust on quiet mornings. Roll call, breakfast, chores, silence. But beneath that silence, something was changing. The Japanese women had stopped trembling at every order. The fear that once froze them was slowly replaced by curiosity, a dangerous curiosity they didn't know how to confess. Each day, Keiko watched the American soldiers from a distance. They were different from the men she had known, taller, broader, their skin tanned by the sun, their movements relaxed and confident. Their laughter seemed to carry no guilt. They walked as if the world itself belonged to them. The younger girls whispered about it at night. Look at their faces, they don't seem angry. They're so tall, even the smallest one. And their eyes, blue like the sea. They spoke in hushed voices, part fear, part fascination. No one dared to say it aloud, but the truth lingered in every glance. The enemy was beautiful. Keiko tried to ignore these thoughts. Beauty felt like betrayal. Every time she saw the American guards smiling, her chest ached with a strange mixture of resentment and admiration. She remembered her brother's broken body, the burned streets of Nagasaki. Yet when she looked at these men, she couldn't find monsters, only faces lit by sunlight and ease. One afternoon, while hanging laundry behind the barracks, a baseball rolled toward her feet. She froze. Beyond the fence, a soldier jogged over and stopped a few meters away. He was young, maybe 20, tall with dark blonde hair and steady brown eyes. He smiled a small, careful smile. "Sorry, ma'am," he said softly. "Can I get the ball?" Keiko didn't understand the words, but his tone was polite, almost embarrassed. She bent down, picked up the ball, and tossed it back. It slipped from her hand awkwardly. He caught it, nodded once, and walked away. It was nothing, just a moment, but her heart didn't forget it. Later that evening, she found herself staring at the sky. The same stars that shone over Japan now glittered above this camp. The distance between enemies suddenly felt smaller, as if war had only been a misunderstanding between people who had never met. Inside the barracks, someone hummed softly a tune she didn't recognize. Another woman whispered that the guards had a radio and sometimes played something called jazz. The rhythm, they said, was wild and free, like the people here. Keiko smiled faintly. She didn't understand their music, but she could feel its warmth. The next morning, she saw the same young soldier again, standing watch. He nodded politely as their eyes met. She looked away quickly, her cheeks burning. It wasn't love. It was something even more dangerous. Recognition. The realization struck her with quiet force. Everything she had been told about the Americans was a lie. They weren't demons. They were simply human, flawed, alive, and, in their own way, beautiful. And that truth, she knew, would haunt her forever. Autumn came quietly. The leaves beyond the camp fence turned gold, then brown, drifting in slow circles to the ground. The war was long over now, but in the hearts of the women, a different kind of battle was still being fought, between memory and mercy, between hatred and something gentler. Rumors spread through the camp. Repatriation was coming. Soon, the prisoners would be sent back to Japan. Home, a word that once meant comfort, but now carried only questions. What would they return to? Burned cities, empty streets, or ghosts that waited in silence? Keiko stood by the fence one evening, watching the soldiers pack crates and equipment. The same young man, the one from the baseball field, was helping load supplies. He wiped sweat from his brow, laughing with his comrades. He looked up once, and their eyes met again through the wire. No words, just a shared glance, one filled with unspoken things. Gratitude, respect, maybe sorrow. For a moment, Keiko wanted to thank him not just for kindness, but for showing her something she never thought she'd see again: humanity in the face of an enemy. But she couldn't speak his language, and even if she could, what words could bridge such a vast ocean of pain? That night, the women received their belongings, what little they had. A few photos, small trinkets, worn-out papers. They sat together in silence, folding their clothes and memories. Some cried quietly, others stared into nothing, trying to understand what this strange journey had meant. When dawn came, trucks lined up by the gates. The guards called their numbers. The women climbed aboard, one by one. The road beyond the camp stretched toward the harbor, where ships waited to carry them back across the sea, back to the ashes of the life they had lost. As the truck jolted forward, Keiko turned to look back. The camp was fading behind a blur of dust and morning light. She saw the soldiers standing in a line, watching them go. Some waved, hesitantly. Then she saw him, the same young guard. He raised his hand in farewell, not as a victor, not as a conqueror, but as a man saying goodbye to someone he understood. Keiko's throat tightened. She wanted to wave back, but her hands wouldn't move. She could only whisper the words that no one would hear. Thank you. The sea awaited them once again, vast, endless, and silent. But it wasn't the same ocean anymore. On the journey home, Keiko stared at the horizon, thinking of those tall, smiling men who had treated their prisoners not as enemies, but as people. She realized something profound: war could destroy nations, but it could never erase the simple truth that kindness survives even in the ruins. And so, as Japan's coastline came into view, she knew that a part of her heart would always remain on the other side of the ocean, in the land of the enemy, who had taught her how to be human again.